Guys, SBF has finally been arrested. It has been a long month coming for this moment of justice, but after digging a little bit deeper, some things are actually worse than I thought. Let's get into it. 14 years ago this week, Bernie Madoff was arrested and charged for operating the largest Ponzi scheme in US history. Its collapse injured around 37,000 investors and led to major reforms in the SEC, in its oversight, and FINRA. In many ways, the FTX collapse dwarfs that of Bernie Madoff. I know, mind blown. So this guy has come a long way in a relatively short amount of time, from being compared to Warren Buffett now to being compared to Bernie Madoff. It's quite a transition in this hero-villain arc. And in the recent events that have come to light, it turns out that the contagion continues. First, let's talk about this CoinDesk article, okay? They report that Bankman-Fried was arrested in Nassau on Monday evening after a magistrate judge signed an emergency warrant for his arrest at the request of prosecutors with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. And here's the weird part, right? So during court proceedings, his mother audibly laughed several times whenever her son was referred to as fugitive, which is an odd reaction, to put it lightly. For one, I know that my mother would not be having that reaction in that situation. In fact, I wouldn't even be alive. It would be my dead body showing up in court, courtesy of Asian Tiger Mom. Anyway, so SBF's lawyers have actually requested bail anywhere between $50,000 to $250,000, which is probably nothing for him. Thank goodness there's still some common sense left in the world, because the judge denied it. Now, you think that everyone would be really happy about the news, but something interesting happened instead. The sentiment on CT was actually divided over this conspiracy-like theory that SBF was arrested on Monday, literally the day before he was supposed to testify at the House Financial Services Committee, because of some ulterior motives by higher powers, because it was just sus. It was just suspicious. Representative Maxine Waters, who oversees that committee, said she was surprised at his arrest and disappointed that Congress would not be able to hear from him on Tuesday. Personally, I'm glad that I don't have to sit through another 4 hours of him talking about basically how he's just this incompetent, poor little fool that had no malicious intent or knowledge or competency at all in any of this. What more could we have learned after his PR apology tour? This guy has been going on interview after interview after interview after non-stop tweeting. I think we've heard enough. I think it's time to look at the actual evidence and use that instead, rather than hoping that he'll tell the truth. I know we've been talking about regulations for like a year now, but I think it's actually starting to pick up some steam because the House and the Senate are getting actively involved. Recently, we had Representative Richie Torres calling on the Government Accountability Office to investigate the SEC's, quote, failure to protect the investing public from the egregious mismanagement and malfeasance of FTX, end quote. And on Tuesday, you know, when Sam was supposed to be testifying, the current FTX CEO, Mr.Ray, testified on his current findings in these bankruptcy filings. It was a 4-hour live stream where representatives asked a range of questions, anywhere from decent, somewhat thoughtful questions to just repetitive questions to downright ignorant questions.
But in reality, the hope of crypto is to be a currency, to compete with the US dollar, and to announce its advantage over the US dollar in that competition. It puts the advantage right in the name. Crypto, hidden currency. Well, what is there a big market for that? Is there a big advantage that crypto has over the US dollar if it actually became a currency, which it's not yet? Well, there are drug dealers, human traffickers, sanctions evaders who will find that to be a good feature.
One representative, in particular, Mr. Cleaver, randomly asked if Mr. Ray would support his resolution for changing the name of cryptocurrency to creepy-dough currency.
If you would support a resolution that I've been thinking about introducing, changing the name of cryptocurrency to creepy dough currency. I'm going to discuss this with my colleagues. I think it's an appropriate name. I just wanted to know whether you would support changing it to creepy dough.
I'll leave that skill set to the committee.
Yeah, I don't know either. But naturally, good ideas don't go to waste around here. So I launched a creepy dough currency NFT project inspired by the highly recognizable silhouette of SBF. There's 350 pieces of individually created AI art with a mint price of only 0.01213 ETH to commemorate the date of this iconic question. Link below for anyone interested. And guess what? There's more. So after almost 4 hours of testifying, it turns out that the FTX House of Cards was laughably worse than we all imagined. This is gonna make a fantastic movie. Like, literally free content for all the Hollywood screenwriters that have, I don't know, been suffering writer's block. Turns out, SBF used FTX Alameda as his own personal piggy bank. Yes, we all knew this, but apparently had like no record keeping, no documentation, and used QuickBooks to do their accounting. As Mr. Ray puts it, this is highly unusual because QuickBooks is like 15 bucks a month. And it's for small businesses. Not exactly something you'd be using for a multi-billion-dollar company. It really just blows my mind how this guy who literally grew up groomed in the top echelon of society, going to the best private schools, prep schools, colleges with the best connections, having Stanford law professors as parents who are connected to powerful figures. All of this, apparently he was like in the nerdiest of nerd clubs at a nerd school, highly competent, graduated with top marks in math, and somehow decides to use QuickBooks. I don't know about this one. Mr. Ray said this is an unprecedented case, in excess of $7 billion of customer funds, and exponentially worse than Enron, the last largest fraud in US history. And get this, FTX's inner circle had a secret chat group called, wait for it, wire fraud. I literally am not making this up. You could make this up, but I'm not making this up. Members of the inner circle of power at the now collapsed crypto exchange FTX formed a chat group called Wire Fraud, and were using it to send secret information about operations in the lead up to the company's spectacular failure. The Australian Financial Review has learned that FTX founders Sam Bankman-Fried and Zishao Gary Wang, along with FTX engineer Nishad Singh and former Alameda Research Chief Executive Caroline Ellison, used a secret chat group on Signal in the hope that the information would remain hidden. So Signal is a closed source messaging platform. And so what people have been saying is that somebody on the inner circle flipped, because otherwise there's no way that a Signal chat group would have been found out. I'm not an engineer, so take it as you will. Bankman-Fried denies being part of the chat, saying, well, if this is true, then I wasn't a member of that inner circle. I'm quite sure it's just false. I have never heard of such a group. And he's obviously always told us the truth, so I for one am really interested in seeing the released chats from this very well and appropriately named wire fraud chat group. It's such a shit show. Here's what I don't get, is how highly accredited investors, forget Kevin O'Leary, that guy's an idiot, but highly accredited investors such as Sequoia Group, Paradigm, any of these big investors, how did they do their due diligence? To me, this is they didn't do any due diligence, because if they had, they would have seen that there was no accounting besides QuickBooks. They would have seen that there was really no record keeping. There was a lot of commingling of funds between Alameda and FTX. I would just love to know what these highly accredited and supposedly competent smart money investors did in their due diligence. As of recording, Sam has been charged on 8 accounts, including wire fraud conspiracy, securities fraud conspiracy, and money laundering. Meanwhile, the SEC, or his buddy Gary, finally took action and filed a civil complaint against Bankman-Fried on Tuesday, alleging that he engaged in a scheme to defraud equity investors in FTX. What a zinger. And so he's most likely going to be extradited to the US. There's been a little friction between the US government and the Bahamian officials. Monday, FTX attorneys accused the Bahamian government of allegedly working with Bankman-Fried to spirit away FTX assets from the company control and into crypto wallets controlled by Bahamian regulators. So we've had an extradition treaty with the Bahamas in place since the early 20th century when the Bahamas was still under British control. In prepared remarks released Monday, Mr. Ray said that FTX went on a spending binge from late 2021 through 2022 when approximately $5 billion was spent on buying a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may be worth only a fraction of what was paid for them, and that the firm made more than $1 billion in loans and other payments to, shocker, insiders. And speaking of those insiders, we now know who one of them is. The Block CEO has just resigned. Michael McCaffrey resigned after failing to disclose a series of loans from disgraced former FTX head Sam Bankman-Fried's Alameda Research. He was the only person with knowledge of the funding at the company. Taking loans is one thing, but taking them in secret is a whole nother level of shadiness. He received 3 loans in total, the first of which was $12 million and was used to buy out other investors in the crypto news data and research provider group. And this is when he took over day-to-day operations as the CEO at the time. Then he took out a second loan of $15 million, which was used to help fund day-to-day operations. And then, because that wasn't enough, he took out $16 million loan earlier this year to, wait for it, buy personal real estate in the Bahamas. Because, of course. It's also strange to me that just yesterday, as of recording, Kevin O'Leary testifies at Senate hearing and says Binance intentionally put FTX out of business. This guy is shameless, absolutely shameless, and they had him testify. And of course, he tries to throw Binance and Binance CEO, CZ, under the bus. I would have loved for them to follow up with, oh, so did CZ also force Sam to commingle customer funds, create a Ponzi FTT token, use QuickBooks for a multi-billion-dollar operation, send important information over Slack and secret chat groups named Wire Fraud, and steal user deposits to buy million-dollar Bahamian real estate properties? And so you can probably start to see why I'm not a huge fan of Kevin O'Leary. O'Leary is just straight up willfully terrible. But yeah, what now? Let's talk about these regulations, because so much of the attention and regulatory scrutiny has just amped up. Senator Elizabeth Warren has tried to pass a bill last minute called the DAAMLA, which is the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act. Woo! A mouthful. But this is actually a terrible, terrible bill. There's a great write-up on it by Peter Van Valkenburg, and the title is that this bill is an opportunistic, unconstitutional assault on cryptocurrency self-custody, developers, and node operators. Nothing about the bill would prevent the next FTX. In fact, it puts more users at risk. So I think it's really important to notice here that the whole problem with FTX was in fact not because of cryptocurrency, but because of centralization and bad actors. If anything, crypto is aiming to solve these very problems by being an immutable, public-facing ledger. Because if Alameda and FTX, if all the transactions were done on-chain, people would have been able to see this coming a mile away. That is the problem here, not blockchain technology. And so it's really important that we don't conflate the two.
We're conflating topics today. Digital assets are not on trial. Fraud and organizations are on trial. So let's separate digital assets from corrupt organizations. FTX, as I've been saying for the last few weeks, is good old-fashioned fraud. And what they did is separate from digital assets. Now, we've all heard that FTX lent its executives hundreds of millions of dollars in commingled customer funds for personal use, and customers who tried to wire money to FTX were instead given Alameda's routing number. That is fraud. That's fraud whether it's conducted in US dollars or euros or digital assets. That is fraud.
And that's why I really don't support this bill. I am very against this bill. So that's my 2 cents on it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Peace.